In this tutorial, we're going to talk about the basic groundwork, basic principles of training and how dogs learn. Um, Training processes have changed throughout the year. When I was at school, there was a lot more punishment, apprehension when you got things wrong. They've realised that by reward, people learn quicker. They want to learn more. Exactly the same thing happens with the dogs. Of course, you can achieve things through punishment, but you then spend your life on tenterhooks wondering what you shouldn't do rather than what you should do. If you put the analogy of if I just say no to you for something you're doing at the moment, there's a million and one other things that you could be doing at the moment instead. And if I just shouted no at you every time I saw you do something you didn't like, it might be that I don't want you to put your hand on your mouth, it might be that I don't want you to sit down, it might be that I don't want you to touch your nose. There's a whole host of things that you could be doing instead, whereas actually if every time you put your hand on your chin, say I gave you a £5 note, you're going to quite quickly realise that putting your hand on your chin is worthwhile. The same principle goes with the dogs, that the more we can reward them for doing the right thing, the more they're going to try. So moving on from that, the main two ways that we are training the dogs are through luring them, so encouraging them to follow something into the right position and then rewarding them for doing such a thing, or capturing. So capturing is when they happen to do something right and we acknowledge it and reward them and pay them for their efforts. A typical example of the capturing is toilet training. You would never lure a wee out of a puppy, but every time they do a wee outside, we reward them. They start realising that, hey, when I did it over there, I got a treat for it. You can train that for a whole host of behaviours. When they settle on a mat, as they remain settled, we give them a reward for saying settled. But potentially trying to encourage them to lay down, you might find it's easier to try and lure them into position rather than just waiting for it to just happen, because you could be there a long time. So the main principles. Think about your training and how much interest you've got in doing it. Puppies' optimum training length is around about 3 minutes. They will lose interest very quickly, and that doesn't mean after a 3-minute training session you stop altogether. It might mean that you do a few minutes on sits and downs, and then actually potentially you'll practice a leave or a drop, so that they're not just having to process the same information over and over again. Puppies' attention span is quite short. You may have to do some play sessions in the middle, but the play sessions is learning too. It might be learning about, impulse control, say how to drop. What rewards do we use? Now, the standard and the easiest reward to use is food. We can look at the types of food that we use, as well as how we dispense the food, but it is a very easy way to reward a dog. However, we mustn't get tunnel visioned into that being the only thing that we can use to reward a dog. A reward for a dog is anything that the dog perceives is rewarding. So it can be verbal attention, it can be toys, it can be food, it can be sniffing, it can be bouncing off something. It's anything that the dog perceives as good, and if the dog gets a reward for doing the things that you've asked them to do, they're more likely to offer you those behaviours again. We will go into that in more detail later, but it is just worth being aware of, how you can reward, and it doesn't have to be edible. So if your dog is not particularly foodie, you might find that your non-foodie dog is more inclined to take the food, but they might want to catch it, they might want to chase it. So think outside the box a little bit. Where you training is important. Early stages, we want to keep the distractions as low as possible. High distractions, puppies will not be able to focus on you. You're going to have to work a lot harder yourself. The reward's going to have to be greater, because the environment is creating such a problem against what you're trying to instruct. Always set yourself up for success. There's no point in getting it wrong at a high level 5 times out of 10, because you're reinforcing the getting it wrong. If we can try a lower level and get it right, at least 9 times out of 10, your puppy's going to learn a lot quicker. So don't be afraid to go back a step. It might be that today they're just too distracted by other things. Too many other things have gone on. The environment might be more stimulating today and they can't work it out. So if your dog is struggling to work at the level that you'll set them at, don't be afraid to step back. Better to get it right than wrong. Short, frequent sessions are better than one long session. So if you do get an opportunity to train 2 or 3 times a day, fantastic. Don't beat yourself up if you can't. We're all human. We've got other things to do in our life. So consistency, I think, is probably one of the main things that prevents us training adequately. If you are sometimes asking your puppy to sit with your hand up, sometimes asking to sit pointing down, it's much more difficult for them to grasp the concept. If we always ask with the hand up, they'll quite quickly realise the hand up means sit. They don't come pre-programmed, so it doesn't have to be a hand up. It can be whatever signal you want it to be. But if you are consistent with how you portray it to the dog's going to learn quicker. So think about your clear signals and your clear communication levels. The way we instruct a dog, we can do in a number of ways. Now, obviously, as humans, we tend to communicate verbally. We do also communicate visually, but as a general rule, our default is verbal. With the dogs, they don't communicate verbally generally. They're far, far more likely to communicate visually. So think of that as your primary source of communication. If you want your dog to sit until they're programmed to do it, they're not going to understand the word sit. No matter how many times you say it, they're not going to understand it. So we need to initially lure them up, lure them into the sit position, and then reward them. Once they're doing it consistently, we can start introducing the word. The word means nothing in the early stages. So we've got a visual and a verbal cue. Now, say the visual is a body language visual signal is the easiest one. We can also use pieces of equipment potentially that become the cue. For example, your dog bowl is a cue to the dog, it's dinner time. Your lead is a cue that it's going for a walk. They've learnt that through association. They don't come pre-programmed. You show a lead to a street dog, it's more likely to be scared of it because actually the association it's got with that type of piece of equipment is dangerous. It's threatening, so they're going to be more worried. Our dogs love it because they know it means good things. So we touched on what rewards to do. Have a little explore with your puppy on different types of foodstuffs. What they do find rewarding. I am a big believer in giving lots of food treats. We've got to feed our dogs. They need to eat. We might as well get them to love us for it. Why put a huge great bowl of food out when you can actually practice 100 behaviours with that same bowl of food? Practice 100 times for the dog to love you that little bit more. So I'm going to leave it for now on that. Have a little think about those concepts. Work out which behaviours you're wanting to train with luring, which ones you might train with capturing. Think about whether there's any times where you won't use your food as your reward and that you'll use a toy as a reward. Have a think about when you might not use food as a reward or toy as a reward. And we'll look at it in more detail in the next module. Okay, thank you very much.